So, how are you going to conduct your interview with your relatives for family history? Is it going to be in person? Is it going to be on video chat, or maybe over the telephone, or even by mail? Well, we'll discuss all those different options in 5 seconds. Hi folks, I'm Greg Kleist. I'm the host of the Road to Your Family History YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me. Hey listen, before we get down to business, I'd like to ask you to do a couple things for me. First, please take a look at the subscribe button down underneath the video here and click on that. That will help me out because I'll know that you want to see more of these types of videos, and it'll also tell YouTube that you want to see more of these videos too. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Now that you've decided the first couple of people you're going to interview, as well as the questions you're going to ask them, what you need to figure out is what method are you going to use to conduct the interview. Now, there's a few different ones. You can interview in person, you could do video chat, you can do it over the telephone, by mail, or even have someone else do the interview for you. We'll talk about all those. My preferred method of doing an interview of family for family history is to do it in person, face to face. I prefer that, and I think that's the best one by far out of all the different methods. Mostly because, it's so intimate and personal. It's going to put the person more at ease. And matter of fact, speaking of being put at ease, if this interview is done in their home, which is the ideal place to put it, they're really going to be at ease there. It's going to be so much easier for them to give you good information and to have a good interview. Now, even though we know that this is going to be the best by far method of doing an interview, there are some reasons why you might not want to do a face-to-face interview. One of the reasons may be that the subject you're interviewing may be nervous if you're recording it somehow, and you should record the interview one way or the other. And I'm going to have another video in this series that's going to talk about the different ways of recording the interview, so be sure to take a look at that. Now, another reason is that it can really be inconvenient for you if you don't live near where the subject lives. If you live 1,000 miles away from that subject, maybe not even quite that far, or maybe even in another country, you're just not going to be able to do that or do it anytime soon. But in spite of those bad points and the point that this is the best way to conduct an interview, don't put off an interview if you can't do it soon in person. If you can't do that, then use another method and maybe follow up later with an interview in person. You want to get that done because you don't know what's going to happen in the course of, say, 6 months or a year or however long it's going to take for you to get to those people to do the interview in person. So, yeah, get it done one way or the other. Another method to conduct this interview is by video chat. Now, this method still maintains a face-to-face factor, so you can look yourself in the eye, so to speak, although it's being done virtually. But, there are some bad things about that too, because some people might just be uncomfortable with the technology. It may scare them somehow. I certainly am not, but there's a lot of people who may be very uncomfortable with dealing with that kind of technology. Now, the different kind of video chats you can do, the main ones as far as I'm concerned, first of all, there's FaceTime. Now, that's a program that you can use if both sides of the interview have an Apple device. If you don't have an Apple device, you're not going to use FaceTime. Another one you could use is called Skype. It's Skype. It's a very popular program that you can use on most any devices. Now, the downside to that is both you and the person you're interviewing have to download the software, and set it up to some extent. So some people you're going to interview might not want to really bother with that. Another option is something called free conference call. And it's exactly that. It's free. Now, it's really made for conference calls with a number of people, but it works very fine. I've used it, I know. It works fine with just 2 people, you and the person you're interviewing. You see them, they see you. The subject doesn't have to download any software or set anything up. It's free, and all you do is you set up the conference with them, the video chat. It'll generate a link. You send them that link. All they have to do is go to that link at the time that you've set up with them to do this interview, and that's all there is to it. Like I said, they have no software, they have no setup. Easy peasy. So I'll have a link to the free conference call website down below in the description. Now, if you can't do any of those techniques for conducting a interview face-to-face, you can always use the telephone. Now, of course, everybody should be familiar with and comfortable with that technology. It's easy to use. People have been using it for, well, a real long time. Now, the bad thing about it is it does lack that face-to-face contact. It's less personal. You can't look the person in the eye. You can't see their facial expressions. You can't see their body language. So that's the downside to telephone. It's not face-to-face, but it's very convenient. Another way to do the interview for family history with your relatives is by mail. And I think this is really the least desirable way to do it, and I would just consider it a last resort method for an interview. Now, why is this? Well, it can be difficult when people respond and write out their responses. It can be difficult to read their handwriting. And the biggest thing, as far as I'm concerned, is you can't readily ask for any clarifications. For example, they say, well, we lived with Teddy for a year. Well, you can't ask them right away, well, why did you live with Teddy for a year? Oh, and by the way, who's Teddy? I mean, if they don't tell you who it is, it could be anybody. It could be an uncle, it could be a cousin, it could be a friend, it could be a neighbor. So that's the bad thing about doing it by mail. You don't have that immediate interaction. Now, of course, when I say doing this interview by mail, it doesn't necessarily have to be by what we call now snail mail, the U.S. Postal Service. We can do it by email, and that's a little better because at least that way you won't have a problem reading the handwriting. Hopefully they can spell okay, so and their English is okay so you can understand it. But at least they'll be typing responses in, and that shouldn't be much of a problem. And you can get that. You can ask for clarification much sooner because you can reply to that email quickly, but you don't know how long it's going to take them to respond to your request for clarification. So that can be a slow and clunky process, even doing it by email. Okay, now the last way I'm going to suggest that you conduct an interview with someone for your family history is by proxy. Now, what is that? Well, that's having somebody else do the interview for you with your family member. Now, this is not the ideal way to do it, and you certainly must have a large measure of trust in that person who's asking as your proxy. You have to trust in the fact that they're going to conduct this interview, ask the questions that you want to ask, and conduct it in the method that you would conduct it yourself. But now, why would you use a proxy? Well, first of all, somebody else, this proxy, may have an in-person contact when you don't. Remember we said that in-person interview is really the best way to go. Well, you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons, going to have to weigh the fact that an in-person interview is the best way to go, but if you don't have in-person access to them, do you trust enough in that person to conduct an in-person interview like you would conduct that? Another reason you might want to use a proxy is because the subject may have or maybe had a problem with your parents or siblings, and they may hold that against you, even though they haven't had a problem with you, but they may still hold that against you because you're so closely associated with those people that they have had a problem with. Who were the people who could serve as proxies? Well, it could be really almost anyone, and depending on the circumstances. It could be a parent or sibling, unless, of course, once again, those people have had some problems with the subject you want to interview. It could be a cousin, an aunt, and an uncle, just about anybody else. Really, it could even be a friend of the family, if it comes down to that. But really, the ideal proxy will be an immediate family member of the person being interviewed, because really they're probably going to trust them more than anybody else in most cases. So what's the bottom line for the method, or deciding on the method for conducting an interview with your family for finding out family history information? The primary way to do it above everything else is what is most convenient for the interview subject. Not what's convenient for you. Now, that may have an impact on it, but that's not the leading thing. Whatever is most convenient for your subject, whether it's doing it in person, by mail, by video chat, whatever it is, you have to accommodate the person being interviewed so they can be most at ease with this interview. Because, boy, the more relaxed they are, the better that interview is going to be, and the better information you're going to get. So hey, thanks for joining me, and join us again on the next episode of Road to Your Family History.